Welcome, everybody, to American Zarathustra. This is your host, Donald Kent. We're doing a special show today. It's an interview with blogger Hapa Perspective. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for joining me. So I noticed you and I are on Millennial Woe's list of people to go on his show Millenniule this month, and I thought, Hapa Perspective, is that a half Asian guy? What's this? And I looked you up and I saw your content and I loved it, and I thought, this is a guy I need to talk to. So to the audience, he and I have chatted a bit offline, and I've prepared some cool questions, but I strongly recommend that everybody visit the link below this show, hapaperspective.home.blogspot, I believe, or blog. Anyway, it'll be below. He's got some great perspectives, and he's a great guy. So yeah, so thanks again for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
All right. So let's just dive right in here. Tell us about your blog. What's your blog all about?
It's hard for me to, I think it could best just be described as I just wanted to get my thoughts out there because I couldn't keep them bottled up anymore. And, I didn't really make it with a specific purpose because, there's articles on a bunch of different topics, not just race, but stuff about just like I write from the heart, stuff about like, just my feelings, and, the Second Amendment is a big issue for me as well, which is kind of dangerous though when you're also associated with racial stuff. But but it's just I couldn't keep it all bottled up anymore.
I think that's maybe most of us, that got started in content development, is just, it's so maddening to watch the world in this GloboHomo trend, and the rabbit hole goes so deep and it's so profound that you just have to scream, you got to shout it out, you have to make some kind of content. And
right.
So how
That's
did
exactly.
you know? Yeah, would you happen to know how Millennial Woes found out about you, or what was the connection?
So I've been watching Millennial Woes for a very long time, since 2015 at least. I found him during the migrant crisis of 2015, I think, or maybe possibly earlier than that. And I just I needed answers, but for many years I just watched him, and I wasn't talking to anyone about anything political. I had no voice, no one to talk to. And I just couldn't stay silent anymore because Millennial Woes covers a lot, but I just didn't see anyone expressing what I was feeling, or articulating it. So that's, but I originally reached out to him because I just he wasn't making videos. I think it was when he stopped making videos, and I kind of felt lost.
Yeah, he took some time off there.
He took some time off, and he was like the main person I followed, and I just I felt like cut off.
Wow. Was there anybody else that you, when discovered, or other people in the former alt-right, dissident right, that you...
There were other people I followed, yeah. There like Apollonian Germ is really good, and
fantastic. I strongly recommend my followers to check out Apollonian Germ.
Yeah,
Who
he's
will
good.
also be, he'll also be on Millenniule with this month as well. So, well, cool. So what is unique about you? Maybe we can get into discussing your identity a little bit first, and then that'll kind of everything moving forward. So what does Hapa mean?
So as far as I know, Hapa is a Hawaiian term for people that are half East Asian. And that could be any mix as long as it's half East Asian. And I guess from what I've vaguely remember reading, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, Hawaii had a large influx of East Asian people. I think particularly Japanese and some Chinese. And the local, they mixed with the locals there, and the locals had a name for it. They started calling them Hapas. So that's where it's a Hawaiian term, but now people just use it everywhere to describe people that are half East Asian.
Got it. So this, in the current sort of white identity political sphere, it's got to be kind of a conundrum for you. You know, what draws you to the dissident right and white identity politics?
Well, I am half white, so
Yes.
I do, given that I do have white sensibilities, and I do feel more connected to my European heritage. And I mean, that's a whole thing to get into.
Yeah.
But when I saw when I experienced diversity, like growing up, and I saw, and then I saw what happened during the migrant crisis, I just felt like, something good that I feel a connection to is being destroyed, or is potentially going to be destroyed if you see a timeline to it. And I mean, of course,
Do you feel that there's other Asians or people,
yes,
Amerasians or people biracial,
even fully Asians? So so
let me finish the question. That want to identify with this and want to protect, Western culture, Western civilization, white people. So go
on. So I think a lot of East Asian people, even fully East Asian people, have no connection to, no biological connection to Western culture, would feel a sense of loss if, I mean, I saw a video a couple of years ago about Japanese tourists going to like Paris, and Paris is basically like an African colony now or something. I haven't been there, but that's what people tell me. That's what it looks like. And there was this like short documentary about Japanese people going to these places in Europe, wanting to see European culture, and presumably European people being European. And instead, it's like they're stepping into Africa, and they get so confused that they actually have like they're physically distressed, and they get sick and depressed because
wow, that's heavy.
It's like when Europeans visit Japan, they want to see Japanese stuff.
Of course.
They like that. It would be frustrating for them to have this assumption that they're going to visit, a Japanese city and experience Japanese culture and Japanese people, but instead it's like filled with Africans or Somali, Muslims.
That's nightmarish. Yeah,
that would be heartbreaking for white people. So it's the same thing for East Asians. And during the migrant crisis, it's interesting. So I don't want to give too many details about myself, but my mother is white and my dad is fully Asian American. And my mother, she's like a lot of typical white people, older white people. She's, very liberal and, refugees welcome, open borders, diversity. But my dad just thought, well, what the hell is going on? Why are they letting in these refugees? They're going to destroy Europe. And I told my dad that London had a Muslim mayor, and he just thought that was so ridiculous.
It is. It's horrendous. It's terrible. Yeah. So, and there's a lot more. I mean, you've got Ilhan Omar here and the other places that of course, everybody kind of knows the circumstances, but so this is interesting. I guess maybe we'll just kind of move forward a little bit about discussing identity. One thing that I brought up, because this is very much for the audience to kind of get a look into this unique zone here. My followers know that I lived in Asia for 5 years. My son is Amerasian. I'm deeply invested in the study of these cultures. There's just a lot to say in that field. So one thing that I usually will explain is that I feel that identity is half culture and half DNA. And I don't know if you could say half, but they're culture and DNA. And so we had this discussion a while back and not long ago, and you were saying something to the effect that culture is DNA or DNA is culture. Could you expand on that a bit?
So I don't think you can separate culture from race. I think race is the product of culture, and culture is the product of race, and they're basically one and the same. And I mean, everything from your phenotype to your sense of self, your psychology, all of your sensibilities are sort of the deeper aspect of you or your people that facilitate culture, that create culture, that maintain culture. So I think separating race from culture is like separating water from wet.
Wow, that's a great analogy. That's fascinating. And one of the topics, or rather the analogies that I use, is the case of, say, there's many cases where Chinese children or Korean children are adopted in America and raised by sort of wealthy white families, and their behavior is very typically white American. Yet, of course, obviously their DNA is Chinese. So I guess I find that interesting to see, somewhere down in there, according to what you're saying, that their personality is actually coded into their racial DNA. Would you say that's true?
Well, like, there's the whole nature versus nurture debate, and I think that there's certainly something to nurture. Culture. If you're like let's say you're in an all white town and you're the one Asian person or black person, then of course the majority will kind of set the culture, and there's peer pressure, and you'll have to conform to some degree. But I think that is sort of like the outward behavior of for example, you gave the example of like a rich white family adopting a child from China, and yeah, sure, they'll go to Starbucks like everybody else and get lattes and have a TikTok account and shop at Walmart or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's just like they're just sort of buying into modern culture. They're not that to me that does not make them like culturally European, if that makes sense.
No.
Because there's so much more like just because someone speaks English and they like to eat cheese and I don't know. I mean, like those are superficial notions of culture in my opinion. I think what's deeper I mean, because culture is kind of hard to define, but I think for me, really the culture is the product of like a majority of people that share a certain set of on average of like psychological traits. So I think with race comes a different sense of self, a different sense of justice, a different collective will, different politics, and this different idea of beauty as well, which ties into having a certain phenotype, because culture comes with a timeline, and you can't just give it to another race, and they're totally cut off from that timeline. They're not the product of that culture.
Right. Fascinating. There's this kind of a story that you were telling me about knowing a guy, I guess maybe when you grew up, who was half black, half white.
No. He wasn't half. So where I grew up, there was it was a mostly well-to-do white neighborhood, upper middle class. But I had a variety of friends, and one of them was a kid that I would say is probably like 70% black, and maybe there's some like white and Native American thrown in there.
I see.
Basically, his family identified with being black, and they were well-to-do people. They had good jobs and everything. They were nice people, but when I would go over to his house to like play video games with him and stuff when I was a little kid, they had pictures that arguably express a black nationalist sentiment. Stuff like black Union soldiers defeating Confederates or stuff like that. I don't want to go into too much detail, but
yeah, that's fine.
I think what you'll find is that people do not let go of identity. So nationalism really is the norm for most people, and they can't let go of it. And it doesn't matter how intelligent or successful or law-abiding they are. People have their identity, and that's just who they are.
So there was young woman who grew up across the street from me. She was adopted. Her origin, I believe, was Dominican, so she kind of had that black mixed with Spanish and Indian mixture. And she grew up in a very wealthy, white, rich family, and her behavior, is just that. So I guess, I mean, these aren't sort of the norms, but I do find that that's an interesting topic. So, but let's kind of focus it down a bit. Maybe we can echo our previous conversation. I'd like to know how you define white people, like what makes up white people, European people.
It's like the gotcha of the left. Like, well, what is white?
Yeah.
And with race, there's no hard lines. It's kind of like the color spectrum where, one color bleeds into another. Of course, race isn't color, but that's just my analogy.
I understand. Yeah.
And so I don't want to get into like a philosophical debate because I think that'll never end and it's kind of useless. So we all know white when we see it. That first of all, that's true. But to be more specific, when I say white, I mostly mean Northern Europeans and maybe some people of Northern European extraction that have Indo-European ancestry and Western hunter-gatherer ancestry. And maybe a little bit of Neolithic farmer. And I'm not saying that the Mediterraneans are not white, but most Southern Europeans, given their history, are more racially mixed.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, there's, of course, the science of these things. There's the history. There's the culture.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, he's Italian. I've had lots of colorful discussions with him about racial politics, and he fits into this kind of deracinated Christian mentality, and he likes to say, "Oh, I'm not white, I'm Italian." And I say, "Okay, we're in a restaurant. An Arab or a black guy comes in and they're going to shoot up the place, and they get to you and they say, 'Oh, he's not white, he's Italian.'" That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. You're going to die with the rest of us. You see, like it's not only just what we are, but it's how others define us in some way.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
But you had some fascinating things to say about the kind of the BioSpirit of white, something about this, I guess, sort of the explorer, inventor phenotype. Could you expand on that a little?
Well, I've been reading Kevin McDonald's recent book, and but not just from that, but just from my personal experience, and just anything that I've observed. White people are naturally more individualistic, so you could refer it as a. And they always have been, and according to the experts like Kevin McDonald, who is a doctor of psychology, evolutionary psychology, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
highly recommend his book, Individualism in the Western Liberal Tradition. Nice. Or is it? Yeah, I think that's the name of the book. I don't have it in front of me, but you guys can find it. It's his most recent book. It's the one that he still has on Amazon that hasn't been banned. Culture of Critique got banned.
Yeah.
But so compared to all other races at any given contemporary races at any point in time, whites have always been the most individualistic. And by whites, I mean Northern Europeans, given the nature of Proto-Europeans, who are also very individualistic groups. They came together. So throughout history, Northern Europeans have been the most individualistic people, which is why they are overrepresented in exploration, colonization, science, and literature, and pretty much everything that is creative or inventive. They are really overrepresented, and it's because of individualism. And with individualism comes this ability to think outside of the box, to think independently. But it's a double-edged sword because you have this default tendency to assess people more on an individual level, and that's a problem when you're dealing with collectivist populations.
This is fascinating. I think the topic of individualism is something that the dissident right should go much deeper on. I have just a few points to make on it quickly. One is that I always joke around saying that we in the dissident right are a group of individuals, which is obviously an oxymoron, right? It's always like herding cats to get all these individuals to do one thing collectively. Um, and if we could harness all our energy and all our resources, we would be way more powerful. But yet there's a lot of sort of complaining and blackpilling and infighting that we really should stop doing. So in that sense, individualism, I think, is problematic. I think we know there's a certain tribe that understands this and uses it against us. That's another topic. But on an interesting note, so I lived in Japan for a year, worked in a Japanese corporation for 2 years in New York City, and have a pretty deep grasp of that culture. And I find it interesting how they look to America and certainly Europe, but definitely America in some kind of a leadership way, in the sense of ideas, innovation, science, technology, even science fiction and the arts and these kinds of things. And I'm teaching English to Japanese people in New York. They would joke with me that, America's great at inventing things and the Japanese just make it smaller, so that's the sort of transistor radios or various other kinds of things. But I just thought wanted to slip that in there as well, that
I thought that was a joke that Westerners had about Asians, but apparently not.
Well, it's apparently the joke has made it around the world. But there's a truth to it, in the sense
They're
that,
happy to admit it.
oh yeah, they don't have a problem with that. And I can remember, for example, my first year living in Taiwan, I stayed with a homestay family. I was the father in the family was a Tai Chi master, and that's a long, wonderful story. But one of my homestay brothers played guitar, and oh God, he could play these beautiful classical pieces, a lot of skill, dexterity. It was just marvelous. And then he would hand me the guitar, and I'd play some original songs that I wrote, and he was overwhelmed with frustration at that, and he just,
really,
how can you do that? How do you do that?
Right there.
How do you do that? So like, there's this like love of, I don't know, just the mastery over copying our culture, but the inability to make that culture. And I mean, I'm glad they can't, because it's like, that's our culture. But, I was on the flip side. I moved there to master Chinese landscape painting and Kung Fu and, study Buddhism and all these other kinds of things. So I think it's great when there's a positive cultural exchange. It enriches both of us. But anyway, it's just interesting for the audience to have a look at these two civilizations side by side, So now, knowing all this, how are you a white nationalist?
Because of I would say because of what I believe. I don't believe that white people should be a minority in their own countries.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that they should. I also don't believe they should be a global minority. I mean, there was once a point in time where whites were 25% of the global population, and now they're like less than 6%. That's not
Oof.
good.
Oh, that's lower than I thought it was.
I mean, I'm talking about, I'm talking about Northern Europeans, but
Okay.
yeah, even it could be all people of any significant European extraction. But I mean, it really depends on where how you define white, and if you use my definition, it's probably going to be lower. But yeah, it's definitely, I think we're less than 1 billion white people now. And you'll hear people today, I'm not going to name names, but figures say that, oh well, don't worry, there's more white people than ever in the world. and that's technically true. There's more white people than
that's fudging the frame, basically. I understand your point.
But they're in a state of peril because there's way more other numbers of other races now, and all the diversity is going one way.
Right. So for me, that's not hard for me to wrap my head around, you being a
not
white
for you, but for other people it is.
So. That was my next question: is how do you talk to the Wignats or the
Wignats?
The
Wignats understand that. They understand that.
Okay, well, help me out here. What kind of challenging discussions have you had with people in the dissident right who maybe have more severe opinions on what white nationalism is?
Well, okay, this is where things get interesting and sometimes frustrating. Is
Hmm.
the Wignats are the extremists. They, I mean, I've talked to I've talked to some Wignats that said, okay, yeah, you're a cool guy, but we want to kick you out too, or something, or
Yeah.
we're gonna sterilize you, man. I'm like,
Oh
oh
no.
shit! If you get a white girl, you're gonna face the wall. That's what's gonna
Oh
happen.
yeah, that kind of talk. Yeah.
I actually think it's funny though. I'm not gonna lie. I think it's funny. I'm not like because I know that it's not gonna happen. But
Yeah.
it's just funny to think about like Wignat like I don't know what you would call them like the Wignat the secret police going around.
Yeah.
Uh, like the NKVD, Cheka and Russia going around like murdering people. It's just funny to think about. And then there's the other within the dissident right, the other side of the spectrum, where you have like these trad Catholics, and they tend to be Southern Europeans, and they're more concerned about religion than race,
Mm-hmm.
and they vaguely support whites being a majority, but they at the same time they're just not. They don't have any like they don't have a hard definition of they don't have a hard enough definition of race to make anything of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like because I mean the majority of the world's Christians, as Millenial Perspective always pointed
Yeah.
out, is I mean I think at this point the majority of Christians in the world are non-white.
Yeah. I guess this brings up an interesting question is in terms of like ethno-nationalism. The idea, like there's a lot of people, I'm gonna just, make this statement, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I would say that, say, Southern European, Eastern European, um, rather Central European, may be more rooted in ethno-nationalism rather than, say, this saving the white race. Would you agree with that? And how do you fit into that? Have you talked to people of say Central European
Are you
back?
talking about like ethnic?
The idea that they want to keep, let's say, the Italian culture or the Polish culture like
Right.
totally pure, or you know what I'm saying? Like,
I don't have a problem with that, but like Europeans like to joke about Americans being Euromutts or something, but
mhm,
white Americans are mostly majority Northern European still,
true.
and Northern European, as they would call it, mutts. But really, if you look at the history of Europe, well, they're also, the Northern Europeans probably especially are, and I don't say this in any disparaging way,
No, 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 no.
are Euromutts themselves.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, because, even as far back as the Visigoths or even, Indo-European times
Hmm.
to the Viking times and, probably up until recently, the Northern Europeans have been mixing with each other because they're, we were talking about Northern Europeans being the most individualistic race in the world.
Yeah.
And what that meant was that for the majority of their history, from what I've read and understood, is that they had no problem uh, interbreeding with other ethnic groups of Europe, Northern Europeans. So,
Hmm.
Frisians and Anglos with Danes and
Yeah.
Norwegians and Germans and Russians and Irish people. That and you see America today. I mean, it's like I would say this idea of like pan-Europeanism. It's worked out. Like America's proven it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a problem because they're basically the same people.
Right, right. That's cool. I was just kind of curious where you fell on that whole thing. So we were discussing differences between Western, say Europeans and Asians, and we talked about IQ a lot. IQ is
Hmm.
something that comes up a lot in these
It does.
discussions. People in the dissident right are pretty well educated on the bell curve and how it all plays in the relationship between IQ and violent crime,
Hmm.
even testosterone levels and,
Hmm.
and race. There's a lot of stuff. But something I find interesting is the concept of social emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
Can you talk on that a little bit in terms of how it's different among Asians and Europeans?
Well, I would like to touch on the IQ stuff.
Okay.
I don't know if you talked about it. I think like I still see people like talking about IQ a lot, and it's important to talk about IQ differences because it's important to explain to normies that racial differences are more than just skin color.
Yeah, of course.
And that's the main point really with IQ differences, and IQ matters too if you want to live in a nice society, but it doesn't just because someone has an high IQ doesn't mean they're going to be a good person. So there's more to it than that. There's a lot of high IQ people that are really bad.
Oh God, yeah.
And untrustworthy, and there's so much to it. But I think people at the same time, like once, like IQ, the IQ question is only useful up to a certain point, and it's just to get people to start thinking more about race, what race really is, and race being more than just skin color.
Sure.
It's really just to get normies out of their ignorance, if you will. They're stuck in, they can't think outside of the box. They're, a lot of normies just they hear that race is skin color, and that's all that they think about.
It's so low IQ to even think like that too.
Well, I think that I don't think for some of them it is, and for others it's, they want to be good moral people. So it's like it's to say that race is skin color is like a virtue signal.
Sure.
So it's like selective ignorance or something. But anyway, so I think a lot of people kind of just get stuck on the IQ thing, and they start because IQ is kind of like once you realize that race is deep and meaningful and important, if you're still talking about IQ, it's just a rationalization, and you've got these people because I mean, talking about like IQ or crime statistics, you're just justifying or rationalizing your emotions at that point. And I think that is a problem because ultimately does it really matter if Asians have a higher IQ? Well, white people should still exist and they should still be white. It doesn't really make a difference to me. I think the whole IQ thing is even more complicated than that. It's not as simple as, one group has a higher IQ than another, because IQ is a multifaceted thing. And I think Alternative Hypothesis touched on this years ago. He was talking about differences in like verbal IQ versus visual spatial IQ, and how different population groups are different. So high IQ Asian, an Asian person with like, let's say 110 IQ versus a white person with 110 IQ, or they're not the same.
Wow.
Or they according to Alternative Hypothesis and others, on average, they're probably not going to be the same. And, there's so much more that goes into it. Like, I wish people would talk more about psychological differences than IQ. I think that is more, that has more profound like ramifications than.
Well, let's dip our toes in that pool then a bit here.
And you were talking about emotional and social intelligence. I wanted to touch on that. The reason why I think white people, in short, have on average, I mean, to some people this would be debatable, but one way to look at it is that Northern Europeans, being the most individualistic race in the world, they have to be. Their social intelligence at least is going to be different because they have to cooperate. Individuals they have to cooperate as individuals in their own societies, and that facilitates rather necessitates things like virtue signaling. So whites have always been virtue signalers.
This just gets more and more multi-dimensional.
Yes.
in a way, and that virtue, the concept of virtue. I had somebody speaking to me recently, I forget who, but this guy was saying that one thing that's essential to whites is that we want to have a high moral standard, and that shows it permeates our culture in the way that we cooperate. We have high trust societies. We smile at our neighbors, and this and that, and there's all kinds of aspects to that. And my whole take on that is that's beautiful, as long as we are isolated among other high society, high trust people in our society. When you have low trust societies mingling, it's just the fox in the hen house. We're sitting ducks. It cannot work. Diversity is absolutely a horrible thing for whites in this regard. So and that plays into, I guess, psychology as well. So where, in a sense, social emotional intelligence is related to psychology in a way, but I guess I'm trying to bring some focus to this question and this discussion, is to compare the social emotional intelligence of, say, Asians to Europeans, and then to kind of isolate that. So, for example, we talked about how in Chinese culture saving face is very important. How the family is above you, and you would never, they in Asia, your last name, your family name comes first, because you as an individual are contextualized within your family, and that's a much larger thing. For example, you don't trust people outside of your family. Even if you have terrible relationships with your own family members, you're still of the so and so clan, and
Right.
that would make sense. That would be social emotional intelligence in China, for example. So I don't know.
That's their version of it. Yes.
Exactly right.
And
So
what's interesting is, sorry to cut you off. What's interesting is you see a little bit more of that behavior in the European population among people of early Neolithic farmers from Anatolia ancestry. That's what they call it. That's the technical term. Southern Europeans and Irish people have a little bit more of that behavior. So they're not like East Asians, obviously. They're still Europeans, but they are a more clannish, family-oriented people. And like you see the mafia movies, or if you have any experience with Italian culture, they're all about their family, because these people are the product of a Neolithic farming culture / race. Same difference. And that's why they behave that way. And I had a Chinese family friend that visited Italy, and she was telling me that, oh, there's some things that are so similar to the Chinese and among Italians, and obviously they're different cultures still, but they're both farming. They're people that are the product of Neolithic farming cultures.
I see.
Even though they're separate races.
Mm-hmm. So when I discuss Asians with people in America, for example, and this is a huge generalization, but I tend to believe that Asians have lower social emotional intelligence, and that's not meant with malice, or I'm not trying to say that as like a
Right.
whatever. But I guess my feeling, though, is that it seems to me that a lot of Asians kind of mature much later in their life emotionally, and they maybe have more difficult relationships. There's a lot of self-sacrifice. There's a lot of not expressing and representing one's own emotional needs. And a lot of that does fit into the structure of society, where you have boys going to this school and girls going to that school, and everything is like study, and rise the social economic ladder, and that, family pride, family duty, where your personal emotions are bottled up, and therefore, that to me is low social emotional intelligence. Yet, as a society, it seems that they are more structured, are better structured. I guess that they're more efficient in some way. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't know. I think they're just different. I think they're just different. But what's interesting is everything is intertwined. Their phenotype is a product of that culture, because they're a culture of arranged marriages. Right. And that behavior, what I was reading in Kevin McDonald's book is that what makes white people unique is that they've had monogamy, and they've had monogamy. I can't talk right now. They've had monogamy and individualistic mate selection for like thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, since the Stone Age. men would marry women that they liked because they were beautiful, they were intelligent, they were, trustworthy, and vice versa. Women had some say in who they wanted to marry. And so individual choice was more of a factor in the, I
Interesting.
guess,
So there's
think of it as like self-imposed, like selective breeding, whereas with most other races throughout the world, see, this is where white people were unique. With most other races, you start to see more polygamy, where one like rich guy marries like 100 women, and that's how you get more incestuous populations, because it's one man spreading his gene, his DNA instead of every man. So that's how you get more. So every other race is actually more incestuous than
which then brings the IQ down.
That's one of the potentially. Well, not that doesn't necessarily bring the IQ down, but it can, depending on how incestuous they are. I assume, but in some cases it can raise the IQ, but it has other problems. I mean, because like Jews are, I mean, sorry to use the J word. God,
it's okay on my show. I'm not.
I don't want your channel getting deleted. So with smaller populations like the tribe. Because we all know that I mean, they have their own diseases. They selectively bred for the mental capacity that they have to do what they do, and despite being more inbred, they it's like with dogs. I mean. Like Dobermans are said to be more inbred than German Shepherds, and even though they're derived from German Shepherds, and there's problems with that, but they're still good guard dogs. And but anyway, so what I was saying, I got off track. What I was saying is, what you see throughout most of the world is there's more polygamy, where one man marries a bunch of women, and there is more like with the civilizational races, like the Chinese, or like the old Middle Eastern civilizations, and other areas, Egypt. You supposedly, well, from what I've read, you also have more arranged marriages. That's yeah. So the community with these Neolithic farming civilizations, communities were more involved in deciding who people could marry. So, I mean, if you could just imagine your parents picking who you're going to have children with, it probably wouldn't be the person that you thought was good looking or smart or strong, but
so
it's actually dysgenic.
Well, it's dysgenic. So that's, I was literally just going to say it's eugenics, a kind of.
No. Well,
let me finish my point. Let me just finish my point. To choose your own, not have your parents choose it for you, your wife, husband, that seems to be more eugenic in that, it's kind of a natural selection.
It depends on what traits you're breeding for. If you want to breed people that are strong, good looking, individualistic, and so on and so forth, like, I mean, white people, the reason why they have like blonde hair and blue eyes, and they're tall, and this and that, the reason why they have the phenotype that they have is because of individualism for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Whereas with these other races that are derived from Neolithic farming cultures or civilizations, they're not as individually attractive. They're not, they seem like they're part of a collective because they've been breeding that way for so long, like literally. So, and like with the Chinese, they had a culture of like concubines. So, I mean, they had some serious polygamy going on, where
huge.
Women couldn't pick a good looking guy, and the guy that a lot of guys like Asian women. So I think that, so what I'm getting at here is like different races had different approaches to their breeding, if you will. And whites, in my opinion, because of the way they did it, which was through individualism, was the most eugenic. The second most eugenic could be East Asians, where and then you just go from there. But so what Kevin McDonald talks about, and I've seen this elsewhere, when you have like in East Asian civilization, when you have like concubines and arranged marriages, the more arranged it is, the uglier the race gets, basically.
Oh, wow. And so take note of that, Dissident Right. So there's a lot of topics that we spoke about earlier, and I've kind of listed them, and so we'll just kind of walk through these things. One concept that you brought up is this idea of secular Puritanism. Can you
Yes.
explain that to us?
So this is something I started reading about recently, and but well, you've heard a lot of other people in the dissident right describe the modern phenomenon of social justice warriors as like
Right.
Christian fanatics without God, and you see
Wow.
like the liberal left is
It's like a cult.
Yeah, it's like a religion,
Mm.
I mean, they're not interested in statistics or facts or truth or even how they like they're just like they are like Puritans, and there was a time, I mean, these Puritans, they had a colony in Massachusetts for like 70 years, and then it kind of fell apart because of other European immigrants coming in later who were not religious fanatics, but the genes of the Puritans, obviously continued, and instead of that, so this is where we get into psychology and race, or like evolutionary psychology, where we're talking about a specific ethnic group of like English people. They started out as the Puritans, and then once Christianity kind of lost its, I don't know the right word to describe it. It started to become a more secularized faith until they reached a point like, instead of being Christian fanatics, like in the mid 1800s, they were abolitionists.
Yeah.
And because they believe all souls are equal, God
Sure.
created man, and
Right. Like
therefore,
John Brown Society, etc.
Yes. And I was reading Abraham Lincoln apparently is of New England extraction, even though he was born in Illinois.
Hmm.
He was he probably was the descendant of some of these fanatical Puritans.
Huh.
So he was a part of that.
I wonder if it was an arranged marriage, because he fell out of the ugly tree and hit every branch on the way down.
Well, I mean, genetics get more complicated, but I mean, because you have ugly people within every race, and you have good-looking people, smart and dumb.
I didn't want to make the discussion about
He
that.
he was tall though. He was
Yeah,
tall.
just throwing a joke out there. That's
I
all.
know.
So, there's a lot of abuses to the Constitution that he did during his presidency that most people don't seem to be aware of. But again, that's off topic. We'll maybe get somebody else on to discuss that. So these are all fascinating things. So something that's really key and like an important takeaway on this discussion is trying to figure out for example, what do whites have in our culture or heredity that is harming us? Is it individualism, virtue signaling? This does kind of overlap, I think, with the whole social justice warrior culture you were just talking about, the godless religion. Does any of this make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I don't think you're ever going to get rid of individualism, or,
I
like whites are,
I'm just
you
saying.
wouldn't want to. No, that's ingrained in Northern Europeans, and that's never going away. And if you try to get rid of it with like an authoritarian government or something, and try to get rid of democracy and liberalism, it'll probably come back in some form. But yeah, I think that they're just that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
What
do you mean you don't have? No, it's okay.
I don't have all the answers, but
yeah,
I think
you don't. Wait a minute.
I think the key will be something like redirecting that virtue signaling, altruistic nature of Northern Europeans toward racial survival.
Yeah, I'm totally.
But not too much, because I don't want them all to be like wig gnats that throw me off a building if being a Hapa or something.
I won't let that happen.
Don't go too far, guys.
No, I won't let that happen. But this is really, really important stuff that we're discussing. I tend to have my philosophy is balance in everything.
Yes.
And so, these cycles come because there's too much weight on one side, and then it shifts to the other, and nature is constantly trying to seek a balance. So if there's too much individualism, then you're going to have a reaction of like collectivism, and then vice versa. as you were talking about earlier, with authoritarian government, etc. So there, I think this is the takeaway. I'm always looking for a gold nugget, to walk away with and let the listeners say, yeah, okay, we should come up with some kind of balance in our society. Can say people in the dissident right or on the right wing in general, can we ever work with people like whites that are on the left spectrum? Is it impossible? Can we find a balance with them? What do you think?
With whites on the left,
Yeah. They're driving the whole death of our race.
Yeah, I think that I mean I don't have all the answers. I think that what's going on is that, I mean, it seems to be like a lot of like Northern European white women, but certainly, there's white liberal men. I think the issue is, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, it's sort of secular Puritanism, and it might be interesting to see how many of these people are of New England extraction or New England Puritan extraction. Maybe there's something there to that. But as Kevin McDonald pointed out in his recent book, these people tend to be of they tend to be like English or Scandinavian, especially.
Yeah. Well, look at God. I think Denmark is the rape capital of the world right now.
Sweden, Denmark, England.
Denmark.
Yeah. So the
France.
the more Nordic you get with the population, the more you're going to see more of this virtue signaling and social justice nonsense and anti-white. And it's not that it's a religion, so it's not something that they believe in it, but it's not. It can go the other way. They could just as easily be Wignats, is what I'm getting at. I think that this energy, I think that for this movement to survive and thrive in the long run, it needs to take on like a religious quality or something, in a moral religious kind of framework, instead of just being like political, if that makes sense.
So a racial religious framework, is that what you're talking about?
Because you look at like the leftist, like white liberal social justice warrior, and it's like they're they're like a Christian. They would have been Puritans like 400 years ago or something.
My personal theory is that feminism is the heart of the machine. It's the heart of the beast that is destroying Western civilization and the white race. Of course, we know who designed it. We know that Jews are behind all this, but they're masters of proxy war. They know how to, so they're setting
all these groups are like they're golems.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. That's an excellent analogy.
Until the story with the golem is that in the end it like turns against the rabbi.
Yes, and I'll have to take note of that. So that's another topic. But this is a thing that I try to emphasize with people, because I feel like, for example, no straight man is ever going to like create an LGBT movement. They're not going to like, what, we really need to have men marrying each other and adopting children. There's no straight man on earth that would ever think to do that. But somehow, women, feminist women, they champion that, they instill that, they henpeck well-meaning, ignorant white men into agreeing with them, and then we've got this whole virtue spiraling happening. Anyway, that's another topic, I suppose. But so
you're talking about like the coalition of the left, where they have feminists and the LGBTQ community and the social justice warriors, and so on and so forth, communists, and it's really like a rough coalition. It's really, really something. I think it's a house of cards, though.
My thinking is like if you shot the heart, then the whole animal would go down. You get my point? We
know what the heart is.
Well, okay. Yeah.
I don't think it's the feminists, but go on.
No. I know. Well, I mean, that's a proxy war, right? I mean, we have what do you want to call them? The designers, the puppet masters. Let's say that we know that. But let's say if that elite were taken down tomorrow somehow, feminism would probably still carry on for maybe decades, if not longer. And so this ideology that, somehow men are all evil and women have, whatever the hell the feminist ideology is, that I think that's just, again, my opinion. I think I can make a pretty strong case for it, but I think if Western civilization is to survive, we have to dismantle that. We have to figure it out.
Oh yes,
We have to take care of these women who are so bitter and so hateful and so just, they're not evil, but they have evil ways, and we have to heal them. So that, again, I'm going way off topic here, though.
I agree, though. No, that's good. I agree.
So getting back then here, so I had this concept that I brought up. I brought up the idea of the Western Alliance, and the first thing you did was you laughed hilariously, and I had to go, like, get my, wipe my tears away after that, and then. But anyway, I think you had this cringy idea of what the concept was, but essentially it's the question of, can a platform be created of some kind, and for people of color or biracial people that want to support or save Western civilization and in effect, become part of the dissident right and white identity politics?
I mean, I don't see why they would need like a group or a label specifically. I mean, I'm pretty sure that not the majority, but quite a number of like your fans or Millennial Woes fans, or people that follow the dissident right. I think you'd be surprised how many of them are not technically white. So they're already here because some people just see the truth, and it doesn't matter what they are. The truth is the truth, and they're able to put their own personal circumstance and ego aside and see things for what they really are.
There's something that I've experienced a lot, is there's a lot of, how do I say, Latin people in Central and South America that are very nationalist, and I find a nice sense of brotherhood, camaraderie with them. They do support the dissident right. They do support white identity politics, although they may not, they're not like European per se. In some cases they are, or they're half European and half, Aboriginal Indian of wherever country they're from. But I find there's a sympathy there, there's an empathy there. And I love that. I embrace that. And I feel like this is something that the general white population and the dissident right doesn't seem to acknowledge or isn't connected with very much, partly because of maybe a language barrier, a geographical barrier, obviously a historical difference. But I just feel that with the level of crisis we're facing in this time of white genocide, we need as many allies as we can get. So
yes, exactly.
So but what you're saying is maybe like having a title or a platform is maybe not organic. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't. I'm not trying to crap on your idea. I'm sorry. I mean, yeah. Sorry, I had like I just I don't know. I really don't. As it is, even I don't say that I'm a part of like any label or camp or anything other than maybe like if I could put a label on myself, it would probably just be collapsitarian or something. That's pretty much collapsitarian and pro-white, and or at least for white countries.
You have just introduced a new dialectic into the dissident right, collapsitarian. So what you're saying is you're an accelerationist, am I correct?
You got to be careful with that word, because
I don't mean it in a boogaloo way. That's not.
No, I'm not one. I'm not. No. I don't want to, be on a list somewhere. I probably already am.
I mean, I didn't mean it that way, but I guess some people take it that way. That's
when I say that I'm collapsitarian. Let me clear this up for the alphabets that are listening. It's what I'm saying is I just don't think that the American empire can be saved or is worth saving, and I'm just
Oh,
gonna. I think that like I like the way that people like Thulian perspective think, just kind of like become a prepper and you know get off the grid. So I'm a get off the grid kind of guy and just let the system destroy itself.
hmm. I guess I mean, I'll start off by saying I know a lot of people like that, and they're really smart people and this and that. But I also kind of feel as if it's, a fantasy in some way because we're, eh, I don't see how you can live happily in your country cabin and growing food and hunting and whatever.
Sounds fun to me.
Wow, no, I know, but like this kind of white flight mentality, I'll just keep moving farther and farther away from the problem. Uh,
Yeah, I
I'm not
understand
an
that.
accelerationist. That's just, I'm putting that out there.
Right.
I see the sort of wisdom of it in some regard. And it's not that it's wisdom, it's just this acknowledgement that things are collapsing and that it can't be stopped. Uh, I think that I would say, well, I don't want to sort of toot my horn or whatever. I'm just curious, why don't you think America is worth saving?
Well, I don't like to think of it as America's not worth saving. I think of America as a nation, and right now we just have this like GloboHomo empire, as some other people like to call it, and you know I think I think America will always exist as like a nation, as a people, heritage Americans, but this sort of like large I mean, it's basically like the Roman Empire or something. You have all these
Okay.
diverse groups here,
Yeah.
and they're sort of clustered in these urban centers. And I mean, the reality of it is that the infrastructure is maintained by white people.
Right.
The food chain and everything.
Right.
And so and of course, taxes and everything else. So
And
white people are sort
services.
of
Yeah.
are working and paying for their own
Hospitals.
replacement.
Right.
And even though sure, these non-whites that are coming here are hard workers, and some of them, like you've got your Chinese doctor or something, there's some of them are smart, but it really is a sad state of affairs. And I think that if white people just pulled out of the system, if more and more of them aspired to live a simple life,
Yeah.
it really you're no longer feeding the beast, if you will,
Mm.
that is facilitating these large urban centers and race mixing and divert. Because where did the migrants go when they come to this country? I mean they go to the cities, and that's where
Sure. Of course.
they stay for generations. And I mean, if you look at a demographic map of America, I mean, it seems like 90% of the diversity is still in the cities,
Absolutely. It's
with the
pretty
exception
clear.
of like the Southwest and the Black Belt. The majority of the diversity is in the cities,
Yeah.
or even with those included, actually. You know,
Well, for
Uh,
starters, living off the land totally is probably the only true freedom that I
yes.
guess there really is. So, like freedom from money in some way, I
I don't
suppose.
think we're ever going to be like 100% free from money or 100%
Right.
self-sufficient,
Right.
but just kind of to downshift, as they call it, or
Yes. Yes.
downscale, do what you can.
Mhm.
Because right now, I mean, yet like young people, they go to school and they aspire to get like a really good job and make a lot of money and live in the city or something, but all they're doing is just they're just feeding the beast.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It should be the other way around. This is where these breakaway civilizations are trying to develop communities where people are learning homesteading and homeschooling and all this various, which
Right.
then, of course, the leftist media says, oh, homeschooling is racism or something, you know.
Jeez.
Everything basically just do the opposite of whatever they say. But yeah, because this is something we discussed before. If America were to balkanize, that would be heaven for our enemies, around the world. I think it, and so
The enemy. Well, no, I don't know. I think it would be good for us, because then we would actually have political opportunities, and because right now I feel like if we keep this thing together, we don't have political opportunities.
When
And
you say we, you mean the citizens, or who you? I'm not sure.
certainly our movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to get
So
what we want as long as, this
right.
country is just continues,
If
the government, the political system continues as it is. I don't foresee that,
I'm not. For starters, this is all hypothetical, but
Yeah, it is.
and we don't have the power to do these things, but it's an important discussion. My thinking is more along the lines of creating ethno-states within the United States so that African Americans have their own state and run their own state, and people can migrate to these areas. Obviously, it's really just whites who want to be left alone, and everybody else wants to leech off of us and
They
parasite off.
always want access to white people.
Yeah, and access to white people is not a human right, and that needs to
Exactly.
be explicitly and repetitively peddled
Yes.
out there in the world. We have a right to our own autonomy. Whites have to start thinking of themselves like Native Americans in some sense. Like we need our own land and our own autonomy, etc. We're talking about high trust societies. So how do we do this? One thing I want to recommend to people, I'm going to put a link below to the article. Hapa Perspective has an article called "A Policy for Peaceful Demographic Reversal in Western Countries." I'll put that below. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit, because it ties together this question of, where is America going? Accelerationism, balkanization. What are your thoughts? It's
Well,
just like a,
I mean, this is all hypothetical. I mean, there could be multiple countries that could be I think ethno-states are kind of the norm, really, because if you look at most countries, they have an overwhelming majority of people that
sure.
are the
Yeah.
population of that country. A
Japan,
nation.
Japan
Yeah.
is the model ethno-state, for example.
Yeah, and it's not even I mean, people just try to disparage it with words like, isolation, but it's not isolationist. I mean, or disparage us as being wanting something isolationist, and that's not the
Honestly,
case.
I don't see anything wrong with isolationism at all.
I don't either,
like, how is that a problem?
But basically what I wrote, in short, is that, like you were saying, access to white people is not a right, but I think a better way to think of it is one thing that I think that it's just these non-whites, they seemingly want access to white people, right? The ones that are coming into our countries in the West. Well, you've got two different groups. I do think that there are non-whites coming in that don't like white people, and they're just sort of here to colonize it on behalf of their people.
Sure.
You have that going on. But then you have people that subconsciously, on an emotional level, they can't admit it to themselves, or they can't admit it to the world, and they might do and say hateful things to white people, but and that's certainly a problem, but I think that a good compromise is an economic policy where non-whites wanting access to white people, they agree to an economic policy where only white families of good character receive financial aid. Think of like welfare, but not because you're poor. They receive money from the government to have large white families. And this would be the compromise. Everybody would pay the same amount into this, let's say, this tax system, so nobody feels like they're being mistreated, or it's going to appear fair. It's like the iron fist and the velvet glove. Everybody's paying the same amount, so it feels like equal. There's this semblance of egalitarian, which white people actually need more than other groups. Right. So it'll feel very fair. Oh, everybody's paying the same in taxes, but not everybody's getting the same amount back. And I think it's like with corn. You if you go into the grocery store, you'll see that most frozen foods or snacks have corn as sometimes as a main ingredient. Like high fructose corn syrup is in everything. And that's because somewhere in the early 20th century, after the Great Depression, policymakers decided to subsidize corn. So now corn is in everything. And that would be my approach to creating an ethno state that doesn't have to be too aggressive or too wignat, if you will, in its policy. And I'm not just saying this because I want access to white people, because I know people are going to say that. I don't apologize or hide that fact. I like white people. I like white women. Sorry, but
I do too.
But and I think that even the majority of white people, given enough time, would come to resent any restrictions on their individual right to have like in the ethno state, there's going to be a white guy that wants to have like an Asian wife or something, or a white woman that wants, whatever, and there's going to be, at least I think it would be hard to have an ethno state that's like totalitarian in its population control. So instead of using the stick, just use the carrot. And so the idea is, if you have non-whites wanting to live in a white country and have access to white people for whatever reason, then indirectly they should pay for it. And the more immigration the more non-white immigration you have, essentially, the more you have people that would be paying for more white people, because only large white families, not mixed race families or anything, they would receive benefits from the government that would allow them, that would facilitate a large family. So just imagine a country where you have your smart Indian doctor that comes in, but he can only afford to have like 2 or 3 kids, as he normally would here in America. It's expensive as shit anyway. But because of the government stepping in, the white family down the road, maybe the father is like a mechanic or something. The wife doesn't have to work because they're getting money from the government, and they get to have 15 kids. So the non-white population would be whitewashed out just by, because the demographic trend can go the other way, I believe.
It seems like every policy we currently have is literally the opposite. It's
right
to erase whites. And so like approaching this as a policy issue, and with these that's a very creative idea. I mean, honestly, that's just a good, smart policy move. But instituting these policies, now we need the power to do that.
So basically, it's like, if you like milk, you should agree that we should have more cows, right? And that might not be the most pleasant analogy, but it works.
Well, milk is racist, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's basically my take to it. And I think that the majority of non-white people that would want access to white people, like myself, I think that's very fair and reasonable. That's a great policy. I support that. I came up with it.
Yeah, it's brilliant, dude. No, it's
and it's solid. Nice. It's not mean. It's not this like wignat totalitarian policy where you're like, you're executing people or like killing them if they get too close to the border or something.
Yeah, there's clearly and justifiably an enormous amount of anger in whites that are woken to our plight, to white genocide. And the more sensible talk like this about, we can create policies, we have to work within the system, use our collective powers to institute policies of this kind. But we have to have the concept of these policies, and you're the first person that I've heard who has that. I would presume there's other people out there, like say Jared Taylor, who's knows almost every policy on the book, it seems. Get behind this. This could be. So this is what I meant earlier about a group of individuals. So like that policy alone, if the entire dissident right collectivized and said, we're going to all push to make this a law, and then just not stop until it becomes a law. And
right. And what would happen?
It's what we should be doing.
You no matter how much immigration you get, as long as the non-white population isn't the total majority, you'd always have this growing core of pure Northern Europeans that's just growing like the Amish are now, and the non-whites would just be paying for it, and it's but
that would
not.
discourage a lot of people from coming here too, because there's
A
obviously
lot of them would leave because they,
which would be
voluntarily.
marvelous. That would be marvelous. And I mean, the people have thought, oh well, let's pay them to go back to the country so that they.
You don't have to. Don't pay them to leave.
Yeah, I know.
Make them pay you until they get sick of it, and then they leave.
Exactly.
But it wouldn't be direct payments. It would be like, oh, everybody's paying the same in taxes. See, it's fair. Iron Fist in the Velvet Glove. Because I think that would be that's the. It should at least have the veneer of egalitarianism.
Nicely done. So getting back to the concept of biracial people, how can they support white identity politics? Is that I mean, because it's got to be awkward for you.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, so you're kind of leading the way, I guess, and maybe not intentionally.
I'm a leader now. Oh. Of the Western Alliance. No, I'm just kidding.
That's right. You are the leader of the Western Alliance. Okay. I dub thee. Let me get my sword out. I dub thee, sir. Anyway, I won't continue. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I generally think in terms of how do we organize? What kind of activism can we do? It seems to me like this is obviously just an organic thing, but I do feel as if like it's sort of the elephant in the room. Like nobody's really talking about that. That we do live among many people who are not white, and their families have lived in America and Europe for generations. And then there's a whole new class, if you want to call it, a demographic of biracial people. How do they fit into the future?
Well, it depends on whether they want access to white people or not.
I would say most probably do. I bet.
Okay, then they should support this policy. If you like milk, you should support more cows.
Bingo. There you go. Well, this is good stuff. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Mr. Perspective. I always think Mr. Perspective is like the lost character from The Watchmen or something. That Mr. Perspective,
I gotta watch that show.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't watch the show. Watch the movie.
Oh, it's a movie.
Yeah, which comes from a
literacy test.
Right. The Watchmen is a graphic novel made into a great movie. The TV show turned into some SJW bashing whites kind of garbage, so I would totally not recommend watching that. But anyway, it's great to have you on the show, and I look forward to talking more in the future.
Absolutely, fantastic conversation, man.
Brilliant. All right, so you can catch Hapa Perspective on Millenniule with Millennial Woes this month. Would you happen to know what date and time you're going on? I don't think that's.
I have no idea yet. Do you
know
when you're going to be on?
No, I think we're all kind of waiting on that, but it's December 2020. So yeah, and follow the link below. You can enjoy his blog there. Do you put out YouTube videos as well?
Yeah, I do actually. I just started. I only have a few videos up, but I do have a YouTube channel. Check it out.
So I guess Hapa Perspective on YouTube, right?
Yeah, I have a link to it. I'll send you the link so you can.
Great, good stuff. Okay, so thanks again, and thank you to the audience for staying with us. As always, share, subscribe, and please share your thoughts below. We'd like to get the discussion going. And you guys have a good night. Bye-bye.